Well, welcome to the next session of the DoD Cloud Exchange. My guest today is Paul Puckett, the Director of the Enterprise Cloud Management Office for the Army. Paul, welcome to the conversation.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jason.
We're going to continue our discussion about cloud and cybersecurity. Paul, I want to take you back in the Wayback Machine. Hopefully you're a fan of the Wayback Machine.
Okay.
Back in 2011, maybe even earlier, is when the Army potentially started their cloud journey. We did a story back about 10 years ago about an email pathfinder that involved a whole 10,000 users at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and Fort Lee, New Jersey, moving email to the cloud. Well, we're a decade into this now, and the cloud is much different, what it means, how it's used, and why it's important. So that's where we're going to start. Paul, tell us about the Army's cloud strategy, and the ECMO has 3 goals to support that strategy.
Yeah, Jason, thanks for the question. So I like the Wayback Machine. I actually visited that Wayback Machine when I got this job back in 2019, because what I wanted to understand is why was the Army creating this new office called the Enterprise Cloud Management Office, right? There had to be something that kind of drove that. And so looking back in the Wayback Machine, looking all the way back to 2011, and you can even find one of the earlier cloud strategies was codified back in 2015. And if you look at the strategy, it reads pretty well, but it became really apparent that the way that the Army was treating cloud was really just like the new data center. And while there is, compute and storage and networking capabilities, it really didn't become a way of adopting cloud to look at, hey, how do I actually change the way that I design these systems to become, more cloud native? How am I more thoughtful when it comes to cloud computing? What differentiates this era of cloud from typically what I found in my data center? Some of those questions weren't really asked. And so when you look at the successes of people adopting cloud, it kind of just stopped there. It's, hey, I'm in the cloud now. And you're like, great, what did you achieve? And it's, I achieved being in the cloud. So we had to fundamentally change that, right? This cloud strategy that we codified in the cloud plan that we published back in 2020 had to make it absolutely clear. The whole entire point of cloud computing is an opportunity for us to completely reimagine the way that we field IT. Building a piece of software shouldn't take 3 to 5 years, and it shouldn't be something that once it's fielded, you realize the customer actually doesn't need it anymore. It's way too slow. And so when I have the ability to have literally a global infrastructure on demand at the push of a button, that means all of my business processes need to change, all of my security accreditation processes need to change, the way that I drive after acquisition needs to change, and ultimately the way that our systems are designed and whether they share information also needs to change as well. So we codified this in the cloud plan, and there are actually a few strategic objectives that we call out. There's 6 specifically. But first and foremost, you can see this really reflected in how the Army's been driving after cloud to accelerate data-driven decisions. And that's really objective number 1. And to complement that is with those decisions, we need the ability to field software faster. We need to change the security accreditation process. We need to get the people that actually have these skill sets, right? We need to establish cloud design, software development, and data engineering as a core competency. We need to also design software to be adaptive, right? This is an unpredictable world. COVID clearly taught us that. And so we need to design our systems to be able to adapt in real time to the way that the world changes and our needs. And then finally, we need to be accountable. We've got a lot of trust that's installed with us where we're going to be spending money the right way, that we're going to be good stewards of the money that we've been given. And so we need an accountability where we're driving the greatest return on investment for our mission with the resources that we've been given. So those are actually 6. You asked for 3, I gave you 6, so double down on that. But those are really our objectives. And we see that playing out in a number of different ways with some great successes over the last year to treat the cloud as a strategic enabler and not just another data center.
I love the fact that why are we moving to cloud, not just because it's the cloud, but what are you getting from it? And I think one of the things that the Army has really put out there as that long-term goal, the long-term strategy, is this concept of C-Army. Walk me through what that is. I was on an event with you just recently where you talked a little bit about it, and I had talked to my colleagues who cover DoD, much more closely than I do, and I said, "Have we heard this thing about C-Army?" And I think, well, I think it's kind of new. So this is really where the Army is getting to say, this is why we're in cloud, not just for cloud's sake.
Yeah, there's a few layers to it, and I'm really thankful for the question. So yeah, C, little C, big Army, is essentially our cloud common services environment, and I'll unpack that. The DoD has a whole bunch of regulation when it comes to adopting commercial cloud resources. There are some critical things that need to happen. This is foundational to the way that you run and operate an enterprise. But you need to be able to see everything that's going on within this ecosystem. There's a certain type of oversight and monitoring that needs to exist, and a certain amount of control to ensure that we're building IT systems that are not only solving a problem and completing a mission, but they're also secure, and they're also designed in a way that allows us to, if we need to, adapt in real time, whether that's a security patch or whether that's a new feature or capability. We need to be able to see this ecosystem and control it effectively. And that's codified in a lot of policy in the Cloud Security Requirements Guide, as well as the Secure Cloud Computing Architecture. And so what we found in the adoption of cloud before is every single program, every single initiative was building their own components of the Secure Cloud Computing Architecture. And so what we found are all these thousand, flowers blooming in the cloud. And this also starts to overwhelm the architecture of the DoD, because now in order for each of those programs to share data with each other, right, we're passing data back and forth to DISA and the boundary cloud access points. Well, wait a second, couldn't we just provide this ecosystem for people and just let them be a tenant within a secure ecosystem? And that's precisely what CARMY is. And so what we've done is we've adopted a multi-cloud strategy where I've got a number of different cloud service providers that I'm leveraging that I've delivered common cloud services into. And then I'm able to let tenants essentially start to populate those secure environments and only focus on their application, their data sets, and their mission and their customer, and leave all of the non-differentiating when it comes to our business value IT things that just have to be there. Let that be my job. Let me take care of that all kind of low value stuff that just has to be there so you can focus on the high value stuff for your mission. And what we've seen is it actually makes it so that rather than taking 9 to 12 months for a system to move to the cloud, be accredited, and then be available, we're seeing initiatives that started, for instance, we had one start February of 2020, and they went operational in May of 2020 as well. It's a 3-month turnaround timeline for adopting cloud. We're dramatically cutting down the lead time to become a running capability. And that's critical then to get feedback and improve on the resources or the capabilities that we're fielding within the cloud today.
And a key piece of this is the security, because you're not letting something go on the network. You're not adopting the service in the cloud without the rigor of the security. So since this is a discussion about security, walk me through how the security is built into CARMY to this, if you will, low value stuff that allows the mission to focus on the higher value stuff.
Yeah, it's the undifferentiating heavy lifting that has to happen in the IT world, right? It's where a lot of our technical debt lives. And so I believe that we can deliver an enterprise capability in the cloud that people love using. And when I say people, I mean the customers, the people that have to build these capabilities. The acceleration for security is really, it allows us to start to see and do more. If we look at the traditional model of security and RMF and typically how it's applied in the data center, there's not a lot of hooks that essentially the enterprise operations team has into what's happening in the environment from day one. I've got those hooks in the cloud, and it starts to allow us to be able to see things and be like, hey, wait a second, you're doing some crazy stuff. Let me start to help you. It's starting to really shift this notion of security left. And then you bake into that all of the processes and components for how we apply RMF from day one. It allows us to really accelerate the both the ATO as well as the confidence of these teams building that they're not going to hit some weird security wall that's like, whoa, 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 what did you do? We've got to fix this issue, and typically it's too late to fix it to become operational, and so they just POAM it and they say, oh, I'm just going to manage the risk. We're able to get our hooks a lot earlier, and then this starts to get into design. When we talk about DevSecops, right, and this notion of shifting security left, we're starting to then have much better system designs, right? We're starting to move further and up higher the tech stack, right? And so we're able to just start to provide these ecosystems as a service that already have security baked in to simply let people focus on the application layer, the data layer, and not hold all these crazy opinions in the IT tech stack that just is going to become technical debt over time. And what this means is it has more resilient architectures, right? They become more cloud native. And that means that if we want to add new features or patch, systems, it's not a notification of something that we can't do for a POAM. It's this world where we're able to now patch these systems in real time. And that speed is really critical when we talk about the risks that we see today in the digital domain.
You mentioned the example of the cloud service that started February 20th, 2020, was up in place by May of 2020. What was that include the ATO, of course, that included all the pieces and parts. How are you able to get through the authority to operate process so quickly? Is it because of automation or what?
There's a few things that when you dive into the ATO process, right? This gets into this notion of inheritable security controls. When we talk about inheritance in the past or reciprocity in the past, a lot of the time it's kind of this feel-good metric, right? Where we say like, oh, we're able to inherit X controls, but we really lack the ability to validate that at that point in time, right? It becomes a paper drill, then it becomes actually running technology that I can prove at any moment in time. I am configured this way, and this system is constrained in these ways. So therefore, they're inheriting these security controls that I impart on them. It's really hard in this kind of disconnected world that we typically find ourselves in the data center, where there's a lot of, I'll say kind of these, pet systems that you have to keep up and running these weird certain ways. There's a lot of just kind of nuance, if you will, subjective. In the cloud, we're a bit more objective. You need to be designed this way. You need to be able to receive patches this way. You need to be able to get these services this way. And it also becomes a thou shalt use these common services. You're not rolling your own identity. You're not rolling your own domain. You're not rolling all these different things that we have to, prove in order for you to get ATO'd. And then this means that our documented systems in EMAS have to reflect this reality and the technology that we have in the cloud. We also need the security teams to be able to see, it says this thing, now prove it, and our ability to respond in real time. So it's people, right? It's process, it's technology, it's all of those different things. But I would argue, and this is something I'm really passionate about, is if we want to shift security left, it's new tools, it's new processes for a domain where there's a lot in the DoD, is just this compliance-driven thing. And so getting those accelerated ATOs means people engage from day one. It means people that understand the technology and therefore understand how this new methodology and this new enabler and technology is better than the old way we've been doing business, because it's not just a paper drill, it actually is our ability to manage risk in real time. And that builds confidence of teams. That also builds the ability for us to be able to respond in real time when we do have threats in the environment.
I love the idea of engagement from day one. And I think that's one of the things we hear a lot about DevSecops. Let's talk a little bit about that process, because I think as a lot of agencies and a lot of people across DoD are starting to move in that direction, we have a conversation during the DoD Cloud Exchange with Nick Shalon from Platform One and Cloud One from the Air Force. Very similar effort that the Army is down the same path. How is DevSecops playing into this whole process to, again, not just security, but capabilities faster?
Oh man, there's a lot to unpack in the world of DevSecops. One of the first presentations I gave internal to the Army was like, hey, can you define, DevSecops? And it's really interesting. A lot of people in the world of DevSecops will focus on really automation or a CI/CD pipeline, continuous integration delivery pipeline. I'll typically focus on the culture side of it. Right? Because if we're talking about the convergence of DevSecops, we're talking about these typically siloed teams of developers and these typically siloed teams of cybersecurity professionals and these siloed teams of operations. And they are all incentivized for fundamentally different things when you think about their own individual world. When you think about the business that we're in, right? The mission that we have, we should all be incentivized by deliver capability faster to the soldier that solves their problems, right? In a way that doesn't increase our risk over time, but essentially delivers value. So if you can start to incentivize teams off of that, and you can start to give them the tools where they're actually contributing together into the same ecosystem, where security can see what developers are changing in real time. Operators can see what might be coming down the pipeline. Developers can start to see the standard in operations that we need to maintain. We start to bring these teams together, then we have this fundamental shift in the way that we do business. And those ecosystems, right, that granular level of control and oversight means that we want to start to have repeatable processes. So if we have repeatable processes, right, then we can start to standardize on what good looks like, right, what right looks like. And that allows us to then throw some automation. If it's repeatable, that's where we get some automation. That's where people are focused on machine learning and artificial intelligence, is how do we get automation to the thing that's not necessarily repeatable today? There's a standard way to build good modern software. And so if we can start to standardize on that, then we can start to accelerate the standard for what needs to be met with a security threshold, the standard that what needs to be met when it comes to quality of code, the standard that needs to be met when it comes to the resilience of an application and operations. And it's a paradigm shift for everyone. It changes the tools and the processes for security teams. It changes the incentive for operations teams. And that change, that transitional architecture and that transitional culture is really the time that we're in right now. And I think that's why it's so hard, is some people want to focus on, a piece of technology or just a specific process, but it's really all of it together. And you've got to drive the incentives of the teams to do so and create room for those teams to try and learn. And that's what we've been really adamant on. So for instance, one of the tenets within Sea Army is our DevSecops ecosystem, create the coding resources and transformation environment. And that's precisely why it exists, is that standardized template for DevSecops, the technology that needs to exist to then allow us to bring the people and the processes to bear, change the policies if we need to as well, so we can accelerate capabilities into the hands of soldiers faster.
How far along are you all with the DevSecOps development? Is it just still in the early stages, or, and I know it's hard to say for the entire Army, but when you look at the Sea Army, is this something that you guys have a, call it, fully developed kind of process, and people are starting to learn how to do it, or is it still in the early stages?
Oh, I think there's always room to grow for sure. But essentially, we kicked off our DevSecOps, and this is part of the challenge is, even prior to Sea Army, there wasn't an enterprise resource and capabilities like, hey, this is for the Army to consume and use, so you don't have to deal with the toil on your own. That's just the world of Sea Army and Common Services. One of the first things that I heard from the field was, hey, we need the same thing for a DevSecOps ecosystem. And unbeknownst to them, when I first met the Secretary, then Secretary McCarthy, back in February of 2020, I said, hey, the Army needs 3 fundamental things if we're going to accelerate cloud adoption. You need to provide common services to the Army. That should be something everyone's rolling their own. You got to provide a common secure environment to the Army to use. You got to provide common secure software development tools and resources for the Army to use, this world of DevSecOps. And you've got to provide common tools and resources to manage data, right? Just to be able to discover and use and share data in a most basic form. Those are the 3 foundational things that's going to allow us to grow. And so our DevSecOps initiative really kicked off in about the August-September timeframe last year. And we've got our ATO for controlled unclassified information just about 2 weeks ago. We already have an operational application that is in production and actually has adoption globally, helping save time for essentially our depots across the Army today and the way that we handle logistics. And so it's definitely at the early stages when it comes to the people and the processes, because these are new for the Army. So we're starting to kind of, tease off those edges of like, wait a second, we probably need to change some policy here so these teams can run quickly but securely. And so that gets into some of the access control policies, that gets into, for instance, clearances. Typically, if you're going to be a developer, that also means you're a privileged administrator with access to servers. You can change infrastructure. But in these DevSecOps ecosystems, you start to kind of abstract away their ability to change infrastructure and just give them the guardrails to play. Well, does that mean that everyone needs to have a, like a top secret clearance to be a developer? I would argue no, because the opportunity pool of people that want to contribute code is vast, but not everyone has a massive clearance. So these are some of the policies that we see that we need to get to change. But again, like I said, people and culture is helping them understand this new way is better than the old way. We can be thoughtful and secure. And it's also changing the incentives of, well, why are we here in the first place? It's to deliver capabilities to soldiers faster, that is secure, that gets the job done. And so these are the maturations that I just see continue for the next year. But it's beautiful to see the community rally around it. Just the other day, the undersecretary was like, this needs to become the new way that we do business. And so when you have senior leader buy-in for something like that, there's really nothing stopping you. And so I'm just really excited for where we get to go with this.
All right, a little bit of news here. Little bit of announcement of ATO for CY about in early February. So thank you for that. I want to just shift just a little bit, because we can talk about DevSecOps, we can talk about Sea Army, but not everything is going to be in one cloud. Not everything is going to be in a public cloud or private cloud. So talk a little bit about the metrics piece, because I think that's a really important discussion here about how, when you look at the impact of cloud services, how are you measuring that impact? And then how does that lead you to decide this goes in this type of cloud or that type of cloud?
So I refer to this as the cloud calculus. There's a lot of variables in this equation. I'm going to give you the typical IT answer, right? It depends. It's really critical for us. So just kind of think, let's just kind of walk through this journey. People come to the front door and say, hey, I'm supposed to, quote, move to the cloud. Well, okay, well, what does that really mean? Well, first and foremost, we want to understand, what business are you in, right? What mission are you in? What problem do you think that you're solving, right? How are you solving that problem? Who's your customer? What data are you dealing with? Is this data that I think the greater Army needs to know about? How is your service designed? Are you just scoped to be this small little thing, or is there opportunity here with how your system's designed? And if we're engaging in this idea of moving to a globally distributed cloud environment, there should be this little bit of an ad hoc notion when it comes to your mission, right? It's not this fixed thing in time. It's like, hey, you know what? Like, this kind of needs some scale to it, right? It could be one user, it could be 1,000 users. I don't really know. And so we need to typically redesign that system to become more complementary to that ad hoc world, where we need to be, build a little bit more elasticity into the system. But a critical thing for us is also the data, right? And so on this journey to really see ourselves as, as codified in the data and cloud execution order, is really need to understand our data, because we see data and our ability to leverage data as foundational to contributing and winning in the domain of machine learning and artificial intelligence. And the precursor to machine learning and artificial intelligence is, what data do I have, and how, what do I think is important about that data, to then let us start to learn and kind of grow in that ecosystem. And so we look at your system design, and we look at what data you have. Then it starts to, you see some some little patterns start to emerge, right? And you start to see the interconnectedness of, perhaps there are a few systems that really share data a lot, and essentially maybe physics and latency can't be holding us back there. Maybe we'd see major investment in transport to move data on all these disparate places, when maybe co-locating these two systems together matters. And that's even should this go into a commercial cloud, or should this stay on premise? Do I need a hybrid model here? And what's really important for the Army is, typically we design these systems that function beautifully in the enterprise. There's no constraints in CONUS, tons of fiber, everything's great. But what about the tactical world? And so what we've codified is really this tiered approach, where yes, there's this CONUS enterprise capability, but then there's got to be these geographically distributed hubs, OCONUS, when it comes to the extension of these cloud services. And then even beyond those geographic regions, I need to have true edge capabilities that allows me to function within a disconnected environment. So that tiered model, we think, is really important. And therefore the network connectivity between it is really important. So a lot of it gets to the, well, what is the global impact here, and what's the opportunity? And then, all the various debates between, one cloud service provider to another cloud service provider. I think we should have optionality. I think essentially having choice there is really important, and not just from a lock-in perspective, but each CSP starts to have services and capabilities that differentiates them in the market. And so when you choose just one, you kind of close the door to that innovation and that opportunity. And I think it's critical to always have that door open, but have the metrics to say, well, what outcome are we trying to achieve? What user experience are we trying to achieve, right? What type of resiliency are we trying to achieve? There should be metrics that drive those decisions. So then if you perhaps made a wrong decision, the metric should tell you, and you should be able to pivot. Failing fast is all about learning fast, and learning fast means you need to have a baseline and a place that you're trying to go, and a metric that tells you the difference between the two.
I want to tag back to something that you said at the beginning, and it's about the data and the data strategy. And you brought it up here is because to win in the domains of artificial intelligence, machine learning, what data do you have, and where does it belong, and how do you leverage it? So DoD put out its data strategy. Connect some dots for me around cloud strategy, data strategy, and this whole Sea Army effort.
Yeah, they really complement each other beautifully. We are producing data at a rate that, good gracious, we sure as heck are struggling to store it all. But how do we make sense of it all? And that's going to require compute, right? We need a crazy amount of compute to make sense of this data, to start to catalog this data, start to look at this data, condition this data, start to make some decisions of, hey, what about this data set and this data set together can I learn? And that's really, really important when it comes to this world of machine learning. When you're trying to build a model, you need to have a lot of data, and you need to have a lot of data that you have high confidence and trust in that it's good data. You're going to be building a good model. This starts to get into the whole entire world of the ethics around machine learning and AI is, if I have a specific data set that I want to learn from, but maybe there's perhaps some biases for how that data has been collected or what data doesn't exist in that resource. If I start to build a model, that model is going to apply a very biased model, right? And so our ability to have access to our data to see and know exactly what data we have is critical. And that amount of compute is only going to be found in a world of ad hoc, on-demand cloud resources. We don't have the ability to keep up with this by buying more hardware and building more data centers. People have done that really well for commodity compute and storage. And it just makes perfect sense to start to resource that and leverage that. So they really go hand in hand. They have to go hand in hand. Otherwise, we're just dropping data on the floor and we're losing out on potential future opportunity, knowledge, and insight that we could gain, and that perhaps advantage over our near-peer adversaries. And we can't be dropping that data on the floor.
Paul, I very much enjoyed our conversation. We're just about out of time, but I just want, if there's one message you wanted to leave for the audience, both federal employees, contractors, DoD, service members, and the like, what's that message from the Army around cloud and cloud security?
Oh, I've been desperate to create this, and I've been adamant within my own team is we have to have a learning culture. We just have to have a learning culture here. This world is changing so quickly. There's new technologies and capabilities out there. As if we're stagnant in the way that kind of feels comfortable to us today, guys, we're going to lose. We just got to have a learning culture, and in that learning culture means you're giving other people the opportunity to be a little bit wrong. One of the first things engaged on my team is start to ask some tough questions, start to get some really interesting answers. And I realized that my team just need to hear, guys, it's okay to say, I don't know. There's no one can know everything. We got to go and find it out though. And we've got to understand the difference between the two. And that means that we need to have a learning culture over anything, and a moment of empathy for others, that they're in a learning culture as well over anything. And I think just that's absolutely critical. So, well, what about this? And what about this? And I'm concerned about this. Yeah, they're all problems. We should probably solve them. And we all need to get smart to do so. And that requires us to lean into each other to do that. And it requires us to be thoughtful about what problem are we trying to solve. We need to be understanding that there's this world that we had before. Let's kind of put our biases aside. There's an opportunity in front of us. Let's get smart on it. Let's collaborate on it. Let's start to solve some really important problems. That's my number one hope, dream, and desire. And as long as we have that mindset that we're on this journey, man, anything is possible. I'm jazzed for the future when we have that mindset. But we have this mindset of we've got everything solved, and we just need to get the right person to just go do that thing that we always know that it's probably not going to get us there. This world's changing. We need to adapt with it.
That's a great message. I really appreciate your time. I've learned a lot today as well. So let me thank my guest. Paul Puckett is the Director of the Enterprise Cloud Management Office for the Army. Paul, thank you so much for taking the time.
Hey, thanks, Jason. I really appreciate it, man.
Now let's rejoin the studio for more from the DoD Cloud Exchange on Federal News Network.